The Galactic Empire had ruled space for so long that victory had become routine. Their warships were monuments more than machines, vast, symmetrical, polished hulls forged from rare alloys harvested over centuries. Each vessel carried a name older than most species, its construction recorded in archives like the birth of a dynasty. To lose a ship was unthinkable. To damage one was shameful. Their fleets did not merely enforce order, they displayed it. So when long-range sensors reported human warships entering a border system, the reaction was amusement, not alarm. The images confirmed what Imperial commanders expected. The vessels were crude, asymmetrical. Hulls layered in uneven plates, scarred and mismatched in color. Weapon mounts protruded at odd angles, some clearly retrofitted rather than integrated. Exposed framework was visible in several places, as if the builders had simply given up on aesthetics halfway through construction. No ceremonial markings. No unified design language. No reverence. Imperial analysts dismissed them instantly. These were not warships built by a civilization that understood naval doctrine. They were industrial debris-given engines. Material scans deepened the mockery. The hulls were composed largely of processed asteroid metal, common, brittle, easily replaceable. Power systems lacked the elegant singular cores the Empire favored, instead relying on clustered reactors wired together in chaotic redundancy. Even their shields were uneven, layered in overlapping fields rather than a single flawless barrier. This is not how one builds a warship, one analyst stated flatly. The order to engage was issued without ceremony. Imperial cannons fired in disciplined volleys, beams precise enough to slice moons. The first human ship was struck amidships, its hull rupturing in a violent bloom of debris. Another took a direct hit to its forward section, losing an entire weapon array in a flash of vaporized metal. To the Empire, it looked exactly as expected. Inefficient design collapsing under proper force. Then the human ships kept moving. The damaged vessel did not retreat. It adjusted course, rotated its remaining hull, and continued firing. Power rerouted instantly, energy surging through alternate conduits, as if the loss had been anticipated. The ship missing its forward weapons shifted tactics, bringing lateral batteries online with no pause, its fire growing heavier rather than weaker. Imperial gunners adjusted, targeting critical systems. Another human ship lost a third of its hull, sections tearing away into open space. Internal explosions followed. By all known standards, it should have gone dead. Instead, blast doors sealed. Compartments detached cleanly. Secondary reactors ignited. The ship's remaining structure stabilized and surged forward, ramming distance closing faster than predicted. Confusion rippled through the Imperial command network. These ships were not resisting destruction. They were functioning through it. Damage reports poured in from Imperial vessels, unexpected hull stress, shield overloads, internal system failures. Human weapons were imprecise but relentless, saturating space with kinetic fire and raw energy. Where Imperial ships relied on perfection, the humans relied on volume. Missed shots didn't matter. The next salvo was already on its way. One Imperial cruiser took a glancing blow that should have been inconsequential. Instead, cascading failures spread through its pristine systems. The ship withdrew, something no Imperial vessel had done in combat for generations. The battle ended with the humans retreating, their remaining ships battered, trailing debris, some barely holding together. By every formal metric, the Empire had won. Celebration never came. Analysts replayed the engagement in silence. The data refused to align with doctrine. Human ships had absorbed levels of punishment that should have rendered them inert multiple times over. Their redundancy was excessive, bordering on absurd. Systems were not optimized for efficiency but for survival under catastrophic failure. One conclusion became unavoidable. These ships were built expecting to be hit. Imperial engineers studied the wreckage recovered from the battlefield. There were no artistic flourishes. No attempts at material conservation. Structural members were thicker than necessary, overlapping in ways that added mass but ensured continuity. Components were standardized, interchangeable, designed to be removed and replaced with minimal precision. This was not poor craftsmanship. It was deliberate brutality. Human warships were not designed to avoid damage. They were designed to continue operating while broken. A chilling realization settled in the analysis chamber. The Empire had assumed humans were copying their methods poorly, mimicking advanced designs without understanding them. The truth was far worse. Humans had rejected those methods entirely. Where the Empire built singular masterpieces meant to endure, humans built tools meant to be used until failure. And then used some more. The battle logs revealed something even more unsettling. Human crews had not shown panic when their ships were torn apart. Communications remained steady. Maneuvers stayed aggressive. There was no hesitation, no reverence for the vessel beneath them. To the humans, the ship was not sacred. It was expendable. As the final reports compiled, one analyst voiced the thought none of them wanted to acknowledge. If these were the ships humans were willing to lose, if this was what they sent first, then the Empire had not faced humanity's strength. They had only brushed against its philosophy. And that, more than the damage sustained, was what made the victory feel wrong. The Empire answered the first engagement with certainty, not doubt. What they had witnessed was labeled an anomaly, a fluke born from unfamiliar design quirks. The solution was obvious: overwhelming force. A proper response would erase the problem and restore order to the narrative the Empire had followed for millennia. A full Imperial fleet translated into human-controlled space weeks later. The engagement was swift and brutal. Precision fire tore through the crewed vessels. One by one, human warships broke apart, their patched hulls finally overwhelmed by concentrated power. Explosions marked the void like punctuation. When the last human ship went dark, drifting in fragments, the battle was declared a decisive Imperial victory. Across the Empire, celebrations ignited. Commanders congratulated one another. Historians began drafting the official account. Humanity, technologically ambitious but strategically naive, had been corrected. The loss of Imperial ships in the first encounter was reframed as acceptable friction. Then the long-range sensors spoke again. 3 separate fleet signatures appeared at the edge of the system. Not remnants. Not reinforcements arriving late. Entire fleets. Comparable in size to the one just destroyed. At first, command assumed an error. Sensor calibration was checked. The readings remained consistent. The ships were human. The configurations were familiar, ugly, asymmetrical, modular, but not identical. Some carried heavier armor. Others displayed expanded weapon clusters. The spacing between hull plates differed. Power emissions showed altered routing patterns. The time between the destruction of the first fleet and the arrival of the next 3 was analyzed. The numbers didn't work. Imperial shipyards required decades to replace even a single capital vessel. Humans had replaced an entire fleet in weeks. Panic did not erupt immediately. It crept in through calculations. Imperial analysts began digging into human industrial data, intercepted transmissions, civilian traffic logs. What they found shattered every assumption they held about warfare. Human warships were not built in sacred military shipyards guarded by tradition and ritual. They were assembled in civilian facilities. Mining stations. Commercial docks. Industrial rings designed for freight and manufacturing. The same infrastructure that built cargo haulers and construction platforms was repurposed to produce warships. No ceremonies. No centuries-long fabrication cycles. Assembly lines. Automated systems processed raw asteroid material in staggering quantities. Hull segments were stamped, reinforced, and welded by AI-managed drones working without pause. Design blueprints were modular, allowing sections to be swapped based on material availability rather than ideal composition. Perfection was sacrificed for speed. Elegance for volume. Imperial economists ran projections and felt dread for the first time. Humans did not rely on rare materials. They used what was abundant. Common metals. Composite alloys. Anything that could hold together long enough to fight. Their ships were inefficient by Imperial standards, and devastatingly efficient by industrial ones. A single Imperial warship represented generations of labor and cultural pride. A human warship represented a production quota. The realization spread through command like a toxin. The Empire had destroyed a fleet, yes, but from the human perspective, that fleet had already been paid for. Budgeted. Expected to be lost. They were not shocked by defeat. They planned around it. As the second wave of human fleets advanced, Imperial commanders noticed another detail buried in the data. The new ships were not replicas. They incorporated lessons from the previous battle. Shield layering was adjusted to counter Imperial beam frequencies. Armor thickness increased around previously vulnerable points. Weapon groupings shifted to exploit Imperial firing arcs. The Empire was used to adapting over decades, sometimes centuries. Humans adapted in weeks. The second engagement was bloodier. Imperial ships still held the edge in raw power, but the margin shrank alarmingly. Human vessels pressed closer, accepting losses to close distance, saturating space with fire. Every destroyed ship was replaced by two more pressing forward. Victory came again, but it felt hollow. Imperial losses doubled. Repairs consumed resources at unprecedented rates. The fleet withdrew not in triumph, but exhaustion. Reports flooded the capital. The truth was unavoidable now. This was not a conventional war. The Empire had built its entire doctrine around preservation. Ships were irreplaceable, so battles were calculated to minimize loss. Humanity had inverted the equation. Their ships were cheap enough to lose, so battles were designed to maximize pressure, chaos, and attrition. The most horrifying projection came last. If the Empire destroyed 10 human ships, humanity could build 20 more before the next engagement. If the Empire escalated production, it would bankrupt itself maintaining vessels that humans could simply overwhelm through numbers and iteration. For the first time in recorded history, Imperial strategists faced a scenario where winning battles led directly to losing the war. A senior analyst summarized the crisis in a single sentence that echoed through the council chamber. Humans do not fight to preserve their fleets. They fight to exhaust ours. As the third wave of human ships maneuvered into attack formation, transmissions from human command were intercepted. They were calm. Procedural. Already referencing updated schematics based on the last engagement. No mourning. No hesitation. To the Empire, the destruction of a fleet was a tragedy. To humanity, it was a data point. And that difference, cold, industrial, relentless, was when true fear finally took hold. By the third engagement, the Empire believed it understood the pattern. Human fleets arrived fast, fought brutally, died in large numbers, and were replaced just as fast. The response was to refine tactics, not panic. Imperial gunners recalibrated weapon frequencies. Fleet formations were adjusted to exploit known weaknesses. Command expected resistance, not surprise. They were wrong. The first warning came from sensor officers reporting inconsistencies mid-battle. Human ships were not behaving like fixed designs. Power signatures fluctuated wildly, then stabilized into new configurations. Weapon output shifted without the usual delays associated with rerouting energy through intact systems. Then visual confirmation arrived. A human warship took a direct hit along its dorsal hull. The impact sheared away armor plating and disabled 2 weapon arrays. Instead of pulling back, the ship vented the damaged section entirely. Magnetic clamps released. The ruined module drifted free, still burning, while internal shutters sealed the exposed frame in seconds. From the ship's rear, a new module slid forward along external rails. It locked into place while under fire. Imperial commanders stared as the human vessel resumed firing with a different weapon configuration than it had launched with. The swap had taken less than a minute. Reports cascaded across the command network. This was not an isolated incident. Multiple human ships were doing the same thing. Damaged components were being ejected, replaced, or bypassed in real time. Armor plates folded outward and were replaced by thicker segments stored internally. Shield projectors were repositioned, their overlap patterns changing to counter the Empire's adjusted beam frequencies. The ships were not retreating to refit. They were refitting while fighting. Imperial doctrine had no response to this. Repairs were meant to occur in dry docks, with teams of specialists, over carefully controlled timelines. Human crews treated repairs as another combat maneuver. Engineering teams worked alongside gunners, exposed to vacuum, sparks and debris flying as systems were torn out and replaced without ceremony. Even more disturbing was the role of automation. Human shipboard AIs did not merely manage damage control. They tracked incoming fire, predicted likely failures, and prepared replacement modules before impact occurred. Some ships began ejecting components seconds before they would have been destroyed, minimizing secondary damage. The Empire adapted again, focusing fire to overwhelm this process. Concentrated volleys tore multiple sections from human ships at once. Several vessels broke apart completely. The remaining ships did not falter. They adjusted spacing, altered engagement ranges, and changed weapon rhythms. Kinetic fire increased where energy weapons had failed. Missiles appeared in overwhelming numbers, crude but effective. Human tactics shifted faster than Imperial analysts could model them. For the first time, Imperial commanders faced an enemy that did not repeat itself. Every engagement rewrote the rules. Psychological strain began to show. Imperial crews were trained to fight predictable opponents, forces that valued their ships as much as they did. Humans showed no such restraint. They pushed damaged ships directly into firing lanes, using them as moving shields. They sacrificed entire vessels to force positional advantages, then exploited those advantages immediately. To the Empire, these were unacceptable losses. To humans, they were efficient trades. One captured transmission sealed the truth beyond doubt. A human commander, calm and focused, acknowledged the loss of 3 ships and requested updated loadouts for the next wave. No emotional inflection. No hesitation. The conversation moved immediately to performance metrics and improvement targets. The Empire realized something terrifying. Human warships were not the true weapon. Human process was. Each battle fed data back into production. Each failure refined the next design. The ships that arrived later in the fight were already better suited to it than those that had arrived earlier. The battlefield itself had become a testing ground. Imperial vessels, by contrast, were static. Any modification required approval chains, resource allocation, and months of work. Humans changed between volleys. As losses mounted, Imperial firepower began to wane. Ammunition stocks depleted faster than planned. Shield systems overheated. Damage that would normally be rare accumulated rapidly. Human ships pressed closer, exploiting every weakness as soon as it appeared. The Empire still destroyed more ships than it lost. On paper, the numbers favored them. In reality, the situation was unraveling. The final reports of the engagement painted a grim picture. Human ships exiting the battlefield were not retreating in defeat. They were withdrawing with data, already transmitting updated designs to their shipyards. New modules were being fabricated before the battle even ended. Imperial analysts ran simulations and stopped halfway through. The outcomes were consistent across every model. Against an enemy that treated warships as disposable platforms for constant evolution, superiority in craftsmanship meant nothing. Tradition meant nothing. Preservation meant nothing. The Empire had built its power on permanence. Humans had built theirs on change. As the battered Imperial fleet pulled back, Command finally acknowledged the reality they had avoided since the first encounter. They were no longer fighting an opposing navy. They were fighting an industrial system that learned faster than they could think. And for the first time in its long history, the Galactic Empire understood that adaptation, not strength, was the deciding factor of survival. By the time they reached that conclusion, humanity had already moved on to the next iteration. The Emergency Council convened without ceremony. No banners were raised. No victories were proclaimed. The chamber that once echoed with confidence now carried only quiet calculation. Every projection, every model, every intercepted transmission pointed to the same conclusion: and no one wanted to be the first to say it aloud. The Empire was not losing because its ships were weaker. It was losing because its philosophy was. Imperial strategists laid out the truth with clinical precision. Human warships were not failures of engineering. They were expressions of intent. Cheap materials were not a limitation but a feature. Modular construction was not inelegance but foresight. Every design choice pointed toward a single doctrine: accept loss, accelerate replacement, improve continuously. The Empire built warships to last centuries. Humans built them to last long enough. That difference broke every predictive model. Attrition calculations showed catastrophic trends. Each Imperial vessel destroyed was a permanent wound: years of labor, irreplaceable materials, cultural loss. Each human vessel destroyed was a scheduled expense. Their production curves rose faster with every engagement, fueled by data harvested directly from combat. One analyst summarized it with brutal clarity. The Empire was fighting battles. Humans were running experiments. Worse still, deeper intelligence painted an even darker picture. The fleets encountered so far were baseline models. No classified technologies. No restricted designs. These ships were built openly, rapidly, and without hesitation. Humanity had not committed its prized assets because it did not need to. They were winning without caring. The Council examined intercepted human communications. There were no speeches about honor. No lamentations over losses. Conversations revolved around throughput, turnaround time, and efficiency. Ship destruction was discussed the same way an industrial supervisor might discuss a broken tool: annoying, expected, easily replaced. The psychological implications were devastating. Imperial crews fought knowing their ships were irreplaceable. Every hit mattered. Every crack in the hull carried the weight of history. Human crews fought knowing their ships were temporary. Survival mattered, but the mission mattered more. Fear flowed in opposite directions. For the Empire, loss bred hesitation. For humans, loss bred momentum. Simulations were run projecting escalation scenarios. Larger fleets. Stronger weapons. Total war. Every outcome converged on the same endpoint. Even if the Empire won early engagements decisively, it would bleed itself dry maintaining ships that humans could overwhelm through sheer volume and adaptation. The Empire had optimized for perfection. Humans had optimized for inevitability. One final transmission arrived as deliberations stalled. It was not a threat. It was not even directed at the Empire. It was a routine human command update, intercepted by chance. The message acknowledged the destruction of several fleets, and authorized the rollout of revised ship variants based on collected data. Production schedules were adjusted upward. Nothing more. No urgency. No desperation. That was when panic fully set in. The Empire understood then that there was no decisive blow it could strike. No single victory that would end the conflict. Humanity could lose endlessly and still advance. The Empire could not. War, as the Empire practiced it, demanded preservation. War, as humanity practiced it, demanded progress. The realization cut deeper than any weapon. Humans were not constrained by the fear of loss. They had built a civilization that treated failure as fuel. Their warships were not symbols. They were disposable extensions of an industrial will that did not slow, did not mourn, and did not stop. As emergency measures were proposed, negotiation, containment, withdrawal, the Council faced a final, unavoidable truth. The Empire had encountered an enemy that did not fight for dominance, territory, or glory. Humans fought to iterate. They would build, deploy, lose, learn, and build again. Faster each time. Stronger each time. With no reverence for the past to hold them back. The war was not being lost in space. It was being lost in factories, algorithms, and decision-making cycles the Empire could not match. By the time the Council adjourned, humanity's next fleets were already under construction. New modules were being tested. New doctrines drafted. Losses accounted for and accepted. The Empire had ruled the galaxy by believing that permanence was power. Humans had proven otherwise. They did not build warships to endure history. They built them to erase opposition. And as the first withdrawal orders were quietly drafted, the Galactic Empire finally understood why the analyst's warning had sounded so impossible at first. Humans should not have been able to build warships like this. But they had. And now, there was no way to stop what came next.